Police officer smirks at black woman on trial, not knowing she's a Secret Service operative. A single smirk can change the course of fate. In the hushed corridors of the John Marshall Courts building in Richmond, Virginia, Officer Bradley Decker wore a smug grin that seemed to convey a damning message. He believed he had all the power over a black woman he presumed was just another defendant. But little did he know, the woman standing trial, Veronica Carter, was far from ordinary. Bound by secrecy, yet poised with unshakable dignity, she held within her the power to upend everything, from the crooked alliances fueling this case to the officer's entire world. And soon, everyone would learn the staggering truth. Officer Bradley Decker had been with the Richmond Police Department for over a decade. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a confident stance that some might call imposing and others might label downright intimidating. His experiences on the force had left him jaded, and his interactions with the community, especially communities of color, were seldom marked by empathy. This day, however, felt like a victory lap to him. He was about to testify in a case he believed was already won. The John Marshall Courts building buzzed with tension. Lawyers hustled through corridors, heads buried in manila folders. Family members of defendants stood by, whispering prayers into clasped hands. Reporters lingered in the lobby, hoping for a sensational angle on the next big story. Somehow, the everyday grind of the courthouse had a more charged atmosphere today. Inside courtroom 4B, sunlight spilled through narrow windows onto worn wooden pews. Officer Decker sat tall in his uniform, his silver badge gleaming in the rays of morning light. He cast an icy glance at the defendant, Veronica Carter. She was a black woman in her early 30s with a regal posture and a quiet sense of confidence. She wore a simple white blouse beneath a navy blazer, her hair in a neat bun. Despite the charges leveled against her, she appeared calm, as though neither the judge nor Decker's presence shook her. To the officer, this was merely another open and shut case, a suspect accused of assaulting a fellow officer and resisting arrest. The official report said Veronica Carter had obstructed a police investigation, assaulted Officer Decker's partner, and attempted to flee the scene. But these allegations had yet to be questioned in detail. The prosecution looked confident. The defense attorney, a wiry man named Isaac Chandler, sat beside Veronica, flipping through notes. He periodically glanced at his client with an air of uneasy concern, almost as if he didn't quite believe all she'd told him. Decker spotted Veronica calmly smoothing a crease on her blazer. Something about her measured demeanor grated on him. He found himself smirking, certain this would be a slam dunk. She looked too composed for someone about to face what could be a lengthy sentence. He figured she was in denial, or better yet, that she just didn't grasp the magnitude of her predicament. Judge Harriet Lancaster, known for her strict approach to court proceedings, cleared her throat and brought the room to order. The clerk announced the case. The Commonwealth of Virginia versus Veronica Carter. A hush spread across the gallery, and for a moment, all eyes fell on the defendant. She blinked once, lifted her chin, and stared straight ahead. Officer Decker, Judge Lancaster began, adjusting her reading glasses, you will have an opportunity to present your testimony. I trust you understand the seriousness of these proceedings. Decker nodded. Yes, Your Honor. He flashed that same knowing grin as he stood from the bench. The Commonwealth attorney, Margaret Fisher, stepped up to the podium. She was a middle-aged woman who exuded competence, with a notebook brimming with questions and references to body cam footage. She approached Decker gently, as though they'd rehearsed this dance many times before. Officer Decker, please state your name and occupation for the record. He spoke clearly, shoulders squared. I'm Officer Bradley Decker, Richmond Police Department. Been serving for about 10 years now. Fisher nodded. Officer Decker, can you describe what happened on the night in question? He took a brief moment, as though conjuring a dramatic memory. Then, with steady confidence, he described how he and his partner responded to what they believed was suspicious activity in a downtown parking garage. He claimed that when they approached Veronica Carter for questioning, she refused to comply, became aggressive, and escalated the situation into a physical altercation. As Decker recounted his version, Veronica remained motionless. Her face betrayed no panic, no anger, not even a flicker of remorse, only a quiet intensity. Occasionally she would straighten her back or fold her hands in her lap, but otherwise she sat like a statue, absorbing every lie or half-truth he spun. Some of the jury members shifted uncomfortably. On the surface, the story sounded plausible enough, an officer being forced to defend himself against an uncooperative suspect. But for those really paying attention, there was something off about the narrative. Decker was too smooth, too rehearsed. Then it happened. As Officer Decker wrapped up his direct testimony, he looked directly at Veronica and let a small, condescending smirk slip. He fully expected the defense to come off as weak or desperate. He had no idea that the woman he was smirking at wasn't just any defendant. She had a past, one more complex and dangerous than any suspect he'd ever handled. And that smirk would soon become the catalyst for an unraveling he could never have imagined. It all started 2 months earlier. Veronica Carter had arrived in Richmond under the official guise of a teacher relocating from Atlanta. She leased a modest apartment near Church Hill, and quickly became a familiar face at a local cafe on East Broad Street, where she'd order a cappuccino every morning. She wore subdued outfits, carried a stack of books, and introduced herself as someone new in town looking to settle quietly into a teaching career. No one knew that Veronica Carter had left behind a storied career in Washington, D.C., nor that she was still actively employed by the U.S. Secret Service. Only her immediate superiors and select individuals in the Department of Homeland Security were aware of her real identity. Her current mission: infiltrate a dangerous ring of arms traffickers with suspected ties to a corrupt local official who was rumored to have connections with certain members of the police force. The job demanded airtight secrecy. Not even the Richmond Police Department was informed of her presence or assignment. Yet the situation quickly became complicated. While Veronica combed through contacts, disguised as a curious new teacher eager to explore her new city, she stumbled upon a series of suspicious transactions at a local bar near the James River. Conversations in hushed tones, coded language about shipments, and interactions with men who seemed above the law piqued her professional instincts. She discovered that these men were funneling illegal arms and laundering money through a chain of local businesses, all under the nose of unsuspecting authorities. But it wasn't only local corruption that had her concerned. Some chatter suggested a more disturbing link. Certain corrupt cops might be complicit. Though unverified, it was precisely the sort of leak that threatened the success and safety of her mission. Stopping arms traffickers with possible police protection was riskier than any infiltration she'd done before. Veronica reported her findings to her immediate supervisor, Special Agent Darrell Whitmore, stationed at the Secret Service's field office in Richmond. He was the only one in the city who knew her true purpose. Their communications were sparse, coded, and always carefully orchestrated. If one piece of their conversation went public, her cover would be blown, and her life could be at risk. Still, Veronica pressed onward. Late-night visits to questionable bars and clandestine rendezvous were her routine, always blending in, always listening. On one such night, she traced a particularly suspicious group to a deserted parking garage downtown. She knew from her earlier intel that they were set to meet a middleman suspected of distributing unregistered firearms. The plan was for her to intercept them quietly, gathering photographic evidence of the exchange before vanishing unseen. However, fate had other plans. Officer Decker and his partner, Officer Theo Morales, responded to a different call in the vicinity. Some routine complaint about suspicious behavior in the parking structure. They were in the wrong place at the wrong time, from Veronica's perspective. She spotted them just as she'd positioned her phone to take pictures. One miscalculation. The reflection off her lens caught Decker's eye. "Hey, you there!" she heard him yell. She froze, cursing her luck. The last thing she needed was the local police interfering or, worse, discovering her camera footage. She was certain that Decker was oblivious to the illegal deal going down on the other side of the parking lot. But if the traffickers realized the police were closing in, They might slip away or eliminate any threats, her included. Veronica tried to remain inconspicuous, turning away as if she were just an innocent civilian, but Decker approached her with a stern face while Morales scanned the area. "What are you doing here?" Decker demanded. "I'm just walking home," Veronica improvised, trying to sound confused and harmless. "Is there something wrong, officer?" He didn't buy it. Perhaps it was her slight hesitation or the glint of her phone's camera. He decided she was lying. When he tried to grab her phone, Veronica instinctively pulled back. She had critical evidence on it, proof that could dismantle a sprawling arms network. If the cops found it, her mission could be compromised, especially if they themselves were corrupt. Decker's partner, Morales, seemed less aggressive at first, but the situation escalated quickly. In a flurry of movement, Decker wrestled for her phone. She twisted away. Morales, startled, reached to restrain her. For a moment, the three of them were locked in a frantic struggle. Veronica managed to sidestep Morales, ensuring he didn't see the photos, but in the process, a scuffle erupted. The men soon overpowered her, pinned her arms behind her back, and slammed her against a concrete pillar. Morales's radio crackled. He called in a suspect in custody. Veronica's cover threatened to unravel right then and there. She told them they were making a mistake, that she was on official business. But of course, how could she admit the truth? Legally, she was not even allowed to inform local authorities of her Secret Service status unless absolutely necessary, and only through official channels. Moments later, with her phone confiscated, Veronica was escorted into a squad car. She knew her mission was in jeopardy. Worse yet, the traffickers she had been trailing got spooked by the arrival of the patrol car and scattered into the night. The arrest was humiliating, especially because she couldn't reveal a single detail that might exonerate her. That fateful night had led her to the seat in courtroom 4B. She now faced charges of assaulting an officer and resisting arrest. With no local police cooperation, no time to escalate through her chain of command, she had no easy way to explain her presence in that parking garage. And thus began the legal nightmare that Officer Decker believed was purely a matter of a violent suspect resisting lawful orders. The trial's first day brought a mixture of dread and anticipation. Veronica's defense attorney, Isaac Chandler, had been hired discreetly by the Secret Service through a confidential arrangement. Chandler had a respectable reputation, but he lacked the typical bravado of high-profile defense lawyers. Instead, he was meticulous, quietly listening to every word the prosecution spoke, biding his time. The problem was that Veronica's entire mission, her identity, her chain of command, was classified at a level that made it nearly impossible to mount a conventional defense. Judge Lancaster was known for her zero-tolerance approach to nonsense. She didn't care about extraneous details or emotional appeals. She wanted facts and facts alone. From the onset, she sensed something unusual in Veronica's demeanor and the swirl of tension around the case. But she made no comment. She simply proceeded in her standard, disciplined manner. Officer Decker's direct testimony wrapped up the morning session. He painted a polished picture of a routine patrol gone wrong. The suspect was loitering, he claimed, acting suspiciously, and when we tried to question her, she became violent. His voice was steady, well-practiced. In describing the violent nature of Veronica, his language grew sharper, focusing on how she allegedly threw punches and threatened them, tactics that seemed carefully designed to inflame the jury. At times, Decker's recounting tiptoed close to hyperbole, but not so blatantly that the judge would intervene. Next, Margaret Fisher introduced physical evidence, an evidence bag containing Veronica's phone. It had been seized at the time of her arrest. The phone was locked, and so far no one had successfully gained access. The prosecution contended that the phone could have contained sensitive or incriminating data about the suspect's activities. Fisher emphasized that Veronica had resisted any attempts to unlock it. Veronica watched quietly. She knew the phone was a bombshell, but not in the way Fisher thought. Inside were incriminating videos and photographs of the arms traffickers. If the phone were accessed by the wrong people, particularly if there were corrupt officers involved, her evidence could vanish. or be used against her in a twisted narrative. She had to rely on Agent Whitmore to coordinate the phone's retrieval and decryption under official Secret Service protocols. But so far she'd heard no updates. She remained in limbo, forced to watch the prosecution paint her as a violent suspect who had something to hide. Finally, Chandler stood for cross-examination. He walked up to Officer Decker with a calm, measured pace and tapped his pen lightly against the podium. "Officer Decker," he began in a precise tone, "you testified that you and your partner responded to a call in that parking garage, correct?" "Yes," Decker replied confidently. "And what was the nature of that call?" Chandler asked, voice unwavering. "A report of a suspicious person hanging around near vehicles." Chandler nodded as if this was expected. "And did you see any other suspicious individuals in the garage that evening?" Decker stiffened. "Not that I recall." Chandler gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "So you're certain? No one else was behaving oddly except for my client?" Decker shrugged. "There might have been a few people walking around, but nobody as suspicious as Miss Carter. She was the one using her phone in a manner that made us concerned." Chandler made a note. "Did Miss Carter ever verbally threaten you or your partner?" Decker paused, just briefly enough that the courtroom's collective ears perked up. "She was belligerent," he finally said. "She refused to comply with our instructions and fought back when we tried to detain her." "So she was belligerent," Chandler repeated. "But a verbal threat? Did she say something like, 'I'm going to harm you'? Or 'I'll kill you'? Any direct threat?" Decker's jaw tightened. "I don't recall the exact words, but it was definitely threatening. She was resisting arrest." For a moment, Chandler considered pressing harder on the point of threat, but he knew it would be more effective to highlight other inconsistencies down the line. He pivoted. "Officer Decker, is it fair to say that you and your partner never actually found any evidence of a crime committed by Miss Carter before deciding to arrest her?" "Objection," Fisher interjected. "Calls for a conclusion on probable cause." Judge Lancaster narrowed her gaze. "Overruled. The witness can answer. Proceed, Officer Decker." "We believed we had enough probable cause," Decker said, his voice tinged with annoyance. "She resisted, that's a crime in itself." "Understood," Chandler responded. "No further questions at this time, Your Honor." The afternoon recess was called. As Veronica walked out of the courtroom with Isaac Chandler by her side, a few journalists called her name, peppering her with questions. She ignored them, maintaining her composure. For a second, she glanced at Decker across the hallway. There was that smirk again. He was basking in his supposed triumph. Little did he know that his carefully woven story stood on an ever-crumbling foundation. One strategic move and the entire narrative would implode, and he certainly had no idea that the woman he dismissed as just another perp was backed by the authority of an elite federal agency with a direct line to the White House. During the recess, Veronica sat in a small side room designated for attorney-client meetings. A single overhead light illuminated the table where Isaac Chandler arranged his notes. The corridor outside buzzed with lawyers updating clients, but inside this room, only hushed conversation reigned. "Veronica, we need another angle," Chandler said, gently shutting the door behind him. "If we keep going like this, Decker's story might influence the jury enough for a conviction, or at least a hung jury. We need hard evidence to contradict them." Veronica squared her shoulders. She knew he was right. Agent Whitmore is trying to secure official approval to intervene, but that process moves slowly. She whispered, "If we reveal my status prematurely, this entire mission is compromised. The individuals we're hunting will scatter, and some of them might be embedded in local law enforcement." Chandler leaned forward. "And if the wrong cops are in on it, they'll burn your evidence. Or worse, arrange for a mishap while you're still in custody. Is that correct?" "Exactly," Veronica replied, her voice grim. "I need time, and if necessary, we might have to blow my cover in a controlled manner, but not yet." A tense silence hung between them. Chandler raked a hand through his hair. "We can argue self-defense. We can poke holes in Decker's testimony. But without the real reason you were there, the jury might see you as the aggressor. Juries generally side with cops unless there's a glaring error or contradictory evidence. Veronica nodded. I understand. But if the phone's data is legally accessed by the Secret Service, that might vindicate me without revealing all the details of my identity. We just need proof that I was observing a criminal transaction. Footage that shows I wasn't engaging in any illegal activity. Then your cross-examination can shred Decker's version of events. Chandler sighed and checked his watch. We have about 15 more minutes. I suggest you get some air or do whatever you do to stay calm. This afternoon, the prosecution might call Officer Morales, and we need to see if his testimony matches Decker's exactly. She knew the routine. Cops typically stuck to their partner's story, especially if it involved using force. Rarely did a partner throw the other under the bus. But sometimes a subtle discrepancy could turn the tide. Veronica rose to her feet. She'd catch a moment alone in the hallway. She needed to remind herself of her training, emotional composure under fire. Outside, the corridor was bustling with activity. Defendants in other cases stood anxiously by their attorneys. A local news camera was set up, capturing B-roll footage for the evening broadcast. Veronica kept her head low, avoiding eye contact with the press. Suddenly, she caught a glimpse of a familiar face in the throng of suits and uniforms. It was Agent Darrell Whitmore, wearing civilian clothes but sporting an official ID badge clipped discreetly under his blazer. Their eyes met for a flicker of a second. He nodded once, tilting his head toward a side hallway. Veronica casually walked over. They slipped into a less crowded corridor near a vending machine. Whitmore handed her a bottle of water and spoke in a low tone. I'm making progress on getting your phone back into Secret Service custody. We've filed a petition with the judge to have it analyzed, citing a possible national security angle. But the local prosecutors aren't exactly quick to sign off. They're suspicious. Veronica's relief was tempered by reality. They think I'm some common felon. Why would they cooperate? The courtroom reconvened, and everyone settled into their seats. Soft murmurs died down as Judge Lancaster rapped her gavel. Margaret Fisher, the prosecuting attorney, stood and addressed the room. Your Honor, the Commonwealth would like to call Officer Theo Morales to the stand. Morales approached the witness box with a measured gait. He was younger than Decker, probably in his late 20s, with a lean build and cautious eyes. He took the oath, then sat down, glancing briefly at Veronica before focusing on Fisher. Officer Morales, Fisher began. Please state your name and occupation. He cleared his throat. My name is Theodore Morales, and I'm an officer with the Richmond Police Department. I've been on the force for 5 years. Fisher nodded, looking at him kindly. Could you describe your role on the night of the alleged incident involving Miss Veronica Carter? Morales cast another quick look at Veronica, then returned his gaze to Fisher. We were responding to a call about suspicious behavior in a parking garage downtown. Officer Decker and I arrived on the scene together. And what happened then? Fisher prompted. He gave a tight smile reminiscent of someone reluctant to speak. We saw Miss Carter. Well, we saw a woman with a phone. Officer Decker thought she was acting strangely, like she was filming something. He went over to talk to her while I did a quick perimeter check. Fisher leaned in. And at what point did the situation escalate? Morales paused. Officer Decker called me over because he said the suspect refused to answer his questions and tried to walk away. When I arrived, there was a struggle. Ms. Carter, tried to push past us, and in the process, we had to subdue her. Fisher turned to the jury, letting the statement hang for effect. Then she resumed. Would you say Miss Carter was aggressive? Morales hesitated. She was resisting. I'm not sure if I'd characterize it as outright aggression at first, but it definitely turned physical. The distinction seemed subtle, but it was not lost on those watching. Decker had painted Veronica as violently hostile from the start. Morales's wording was more measured. Fisher, sensing the need to steer him back on script, moved in swiftly. So you'd agree there was physical contact initiated by Miss Carter, which then forced you to act in self-defense, correct? Yes, ma'am, Morales said, although he sounded less certain than Decker. Fisher nodded, satisfied. No further questions at this time, Your Honor. Chandler stood for cross-examination, adjusting his tie. Officer Morales, he began softly. You mentioned that you did a perimeter check before joining Officer Decker. Did you notice anything unusual around the garage? Morales furrowed his brow. There were some cars and a few people leaving, but nothing I could pinpoint as criminal activity. Did you notice any individuals who appeared to be exchanging items or engaging in a transaction? Chandler pressed. No, sir, Morales replied, shifting in his seat. I only saw Miss Carter after Officer Decker called me over. Chandler's expression was neutral. Let's talk about what you saw Miss Carter doing. You said she was using her phone. Was she pointing it at Officer Decker, filming him? Was there a confrontation before that? Morales shook his head slowly. I honestly didn't see her phone's screen. She was holding it at chest level. Officer Decker told me she was filming or taking pictures, but I never actually saw what was on the screen. So your partner told you she was filming, and you took his word for it, correct? I trust my partner, Morales said, sounding slightly defensive. Understood, Chandler said, holding up a hand. Now, when it came to subduing Miss Carter, could you describe exactly how that happened? Morales inhaled deeply. Miss Carter kept saying we were making a mistake and tried to get away. She wasn't throwing punches at me specifically, but she was flailing her arms, trying to protect her phone, I think. Officer Decker grabbed her arm, and I helped. We pinned her to the concrete barrier. Chandler took a few steps closer, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret with the jury. Did Miss Carter at any point verbally threaten you or Officer Decker? Did she say something like, I'm going to attack you or harm you? Morales seemed caught off guard. Not that I recall, sir. Chandler glanced at the jury. So your testimony is that Miss Carter was resisting arrest, but you didn't hear her threaten violence. Am I correct? Yes, sir, Morales confirmed, shoulders sagging slightly. Thank you, Officer Morales. Chandler looked over at the judge. No further questions, Your Honor. Morales stepped down, his eyes flickering with something akin to uncertainty or guilt. Perhaps it was the memory of that night, or the realization that the official story might be more complex. Either way, his testimony, while generally aligning with Decker's, lacked the same certainty. He hadn't categorically stated that Veronica instigated violence, only that she resisted. As the court recessed once more, Veronica felt a small surge of hope. Morales's measured words might be the thread Chandler needed to unravel Decker's narrative. If even the partner wouldn't fully corroborate Decker's depiction of events, then the prosecution's case might not be as airtight as it appeared. Meanwhile, in the back of the room, Agent Whitmore silently observed, his expression unreadable behind folded arms. With Morales's testimony concluded, the next steps in this trial would push them closer to the moment of truth, when Veronica could finally reclaim her phone, expose the arms traffickers, and reveal that the woman on trial was no ordinary defendant at all. That evening, after the court had adjourned for the day, Veronica found herself escorted back to a holding area reserved for defendants out on bail, but still under legal scrutiny. She had been granted bail, but strict conditions limited her movement. She couldn't leave the city without the court's permission, and she had to check in regularly with the local authorities. An ironic twist given that she was technically a federal agent. Isaac Chandler visited her in the quiet meeting room. The overhead fluorescent lights buzzed faintly as he dropped a stack of paperwork onto the table. He looked weary, dark circles under his eyes. I just finished a call with the prosecution's office, he said, taking a seat. They're very confident in their case, but they also mentioned you might have new evidence. Someone's been whispering in their ear about your phone. He arched an eyebrow. That must be your federal contact? Veronica managed a small nod. Yes, Agent Whitmore is pushing for a forensic exam by the Secret Service. Chandler sat back. They know something's going on, but they don't know what. The prosecution is starting to get antsy. I suspect they'll try to expedite the trial. We might have only a day or two before they wrap their arguments. Veronica exhaled, leaning back in her chair. That's too soon. We need the judge to sign off on the phone examination. I can't legally hand it over without a court order, or it'll look like tampering with evidence. Chandler rubbed his temples. I've filed the necessary motions. We should hear by tomorrow morning if the judge grants the forensic request. Until then, we're in a stalemate. She drummed her fingers on the table, glancing at the stack of papers. Any new angle we can use based on Morales' testimony? Potentially. He didn't confirm Decker's assertion that you instigated violence. That helps. We can argue that you were merely defending your property and that Decker escalated the situation. But it's still, he said, she said. And juries often side with law enforcement. Veronica's gaze hardened. Decker's not untouchable. If I can show what really happened in that garage, the entire jury's perspective changes. Chandler nodded. We just have to survive until then. Outside, the hallway bustled with attorneys packing up for the night. Veronica could hear the echo of footsteps and the occasional snatch of conversation. Then came a familiar voice from behind the door. Mind if I come in? Agent Whitmore stepped inside, closing the door gently. He offered Chandler a polite nod. Then he turned his attention to Veronica, his face betraying a mix of urgency and reassurance. I've got news, he began. The DOJ is pressing the Commonwealth Attorney's Office. They want your phone to be analyzed by one of our digital forensic experts. No local cops, no outside contractors. If the judge signs off, we'll get immediate access to it. We're working through the night to expedite the paperwork. Veronica let out a slow breath she hadn't realized she was holding. That's the best news I've heard all day. Whitmore gave her a sympathetic smile. Don't celebrate yet. The judge could still block it, or the prosecution could argue for a local examiner. But we're close. He glanced at Chandler. I just hope your cross-examination can hold off any immediate motions for a verdict. Because if they close out this case before we crack open that phone, we'll be in trouble. Chandler gathered his papers. We'll do our best. The prosecution has at least 2 more witnesses scheduled. Some forensic analyst who looked at the phone's exterior for prints, and a bystander they tracked down. That should give us another day. Veronica's heart pounded. A bystander? Did anyone actually see what happened? Chandler shrugged. Apparently someone in the parking garage who claims to have witnessed part of the arrest. The prosecution just found them. We'll have to see what they say. This development unsettled Veronica. Witnesses could be wild cards. But if the bystander's testimony contradicted Decker's story, it might be a blessing in disguise. Let's hope they saw something that helps. Whitmore checked his watch. I have to go. Keep calm, follow Chandler's lead, and we'll get that phone unlocked soon. Once that happens, we'll have concrete evidence that you were there on a legitimate federal mission. I'll make sure it all comes to light. Veronica gave him a resolute nod. Thank you. As Whitmore left, Veronica's mind swirled with questions. She thought of the men in that parking garage, the real criminals. Where were they now? How many guns had slipped through the cracks during her incarceration? The entire reason she risked her cover was to stop these traffickers. Now she was the one on trial, fighting for her reputation and, in some sense, her very life. She turned to Chandler. Tomorrow's going to be pivotal. If the prosecution calls that bystander, we have to be ready to counter any narrative they spin. Chandler's voice was steady. We'll adapt, Veronica. It's what I do. You just keep your composure up there. Composure. The word felt heavier than usual. Veronica thought of her years of training, silent infiltration, hidden earpieces, the tension of tailing suspects through crowded streets. None of that had prepared her for the vulnerability of a public courtroom trial. But she was a professional, and professionals adapt. By tomorrow afternoon, the scales could tip one way or another. Either the judge would allow the phone's forensic analysis, or the prosecution would barrel ahead, seeking a conviction. She looked at Chandler and nodded, steeling herself for the battle still to come. Morning arrived with a crispness in the air, sunlight gleaming off the windows of the John Marshall Courts building. Veronica found herself once again in the defendant's seat, the overhead lights making the wood-paneled walls glow. Isaac Chandler meticulously reorganized his files, preparing for whatever curveballs the prosecution might throw. Judge Lancaster took her seat and, after the usual formalities, signaled to Margaret Fisher. The prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, the Commonwealth calls Jennifer Perez to the stand." A woman in her mid-20s, dressed in business casual attire, stepped forward. She had short brown hair and an anxious expression. Once sworn in, Fisher began. "Miss Perez, could you tell us where you were on the night in question?" Jennifer spoke softly but clearly. "I was visiting a friend who lives downtown. I parked in that garage. When I was walking to my car, I saw flashing lights and heard a commotion." Fisher nodded. "And could you describe what you saw specifically?" Jennifer glanced at Veronica and then at Decker, swallowing hard. "I saw two officers struggling with a woman. Her. At first, I wasn't sure what was happening, but it looked like the woman was trying to keep something away from them. Her phone, I think." "And how did the officers respond?" Fisher prompted. Jennifer hesitated, looking uncomfortable. "They pinned her against a wall. She yelled something about 'you don't understand. I have authorization.' But the officers just told her to stop resisting. Then they forced her hands behind her back and took the phone." The gallery murmured, causing Judge Lancaster to tap her gavel lightly. Fisher continued. "Would you say the woman appeared aggressive? Did she strike the officers?" Jennifer shook her head slowly. I don't know. It looked like she was flailing, but more like trying to protect her phone or push them away, not necessarily attacking. She was definitely not calm, but I can't say she was throwing punches or anything." Veronica felt a strange sense of relief. Maybe this witness would bolster her case more than the prosecution realized. Fisher attempted to salvage the moment. "Miss Perez, did you see who initiated physical contact?" Jennifer looked at Decker, then Morales. "I'm not sure. By the time I got there, all three of them were tangled up, but the officers seemed to be the ones grabbing her." Fisher pursed her lips. "No further questions, Your Honor." The prosecutor returned to her seat with a guarded expression, uncertain if this witness had helped or harmed their narrative. Chandler strode to the podium. "Miss Perez, thank you for your time. When you arrived, you said you heard Miss Carter mentioning authorization. Could you elaborate?" Jennifer furrowed her brow, recalling the moment. She said something like, "You can't do this. I'm on official business." Or maybe I have authorization. It was all happening so quickly, but I remember her sounding urgent, like she wanted to explain. Chandler gave a mild nod. "Did you hear Officer Decker or Officer Morales ask her any questions about it?" She shook her head. "No. It all happened so fast. They just kept telling her to stop resisting." Chandler flipped through his notes. "So from your perspective, Miss Carter was trying to communicate something important, but the officers didn't listen. Is that correct?" "Yes, that's how it seemed. That's—" Chandler offered a warm smile. "Thank you, Miss Perez. No further questions, Your Honor." Judge Lancaster looked thoughtful, as if evaluating how this testimony fit into the broader puzzle. Jennifer Perez stepped down, glancing once more at Veronica. The young woman looked sympathetic, as though wishing she could do more to help. When the witness was gone, Judge Lancaster turned to the attorneys. "Miss Fisher, any additional witnesses?" Fisher shuffled her papers. "One more, Your Honor. We plan to call an evidence technician from the Richmond Police Department who cataloged Miss Carter's phone." Veronica exchanged a look with Chandler. This was likely the moment they'd been waiting for, another opening to push for the phone's forensic analysis by the Secret Service. Sure enough, once the technician took the stand, Fisher asked standard questions about the chain of custody for the phone. Then Chandler sprang into action. He requested a sidebar with the judge. The attorneys approached the bench, speaking in low tones. Veronica watched as Chandler argued vigorously, presumably urging that the phone be examined by a specialized team, given the potential for exonerating evidence. Fisher scowled, but after several tense minutes, Judge Lancaster cleared her throat. "Counselors," the judge said, her voice carrying the authority that made her reputation formidable, "I have decided that a neutral forensic analysis is warranted. The phone is central to the matter at hand, and Miss Carter claims it contains exculpatory information. We will allow an expert from the U.S. Secret Service, under supervision of this court and with cooperation from local authorities, to examine the device. Court will be in recess until the analysis is complete. I expect a report by tomorrow." A wave of relief swept through Veronica. Finally, they had the green light. She cast her gaze toward Decker. His expression darkened. That confident smirk was gone, replaced by uncertainty, and in that instant a flicker of fear seemed to cross his eyes. Fear that the truth might surface and dismantle his carefully constructed narrative. Judge Lancaster slammed her gavel lightly. "We stand in recess. Return tomorrow at 9. The jury was escorted out and Veronica remained seated, letting the tension of the moment dissipate. This was her chance. The moment she'd been hoping for since that awful night in the parking garage. Soon, the phone's contents would tell their story, and the real criminals lurking in Richmond's shadows might finally be exposed. That afternoon, a hush settled over the otherwise bustling courthouse. Veronica sat in a small conference room reserved for the phone's forensic analysis. Agent Whitmore stood beside her, his posture stoic, while a Secret Service digital forensic expert named Gavin Adams methodically connected cables and devices to the seized phone. A Richmond Police Department officer supervised from a distance, as per the judge's orders to ensure proper protocol. Veronica's heart pounded. She'd stored crucial evidence on that phone, secretly taken pictures of men exchanging unmarked crates, presumably containing firearms, and the license plates of vehicles she suspected were part of the smuggling operation. If the phone's data had survived, it would reveal everything she'd risked her mission to secure. Chandler entered, carrying a briefcase of documents. He gave Veronica a reassuring nod. "Gavin, how's it look?" Gavin tapped at his laptop, lips pursed. "It's encrypted with multiple layers of security, but we use these systems daily for federal cases. It'll take a bit of time, but we'll crack it." He typed a few commands, eyes scanning lines of code. Just a few more minutes. Meanwhile, the Richmond officer in the corner, Sergeant Quinn, shifted uneasily. He looked as though he'd rather be anywhere else. Watching a federal agent override phone security protocols likely wasn't part of his usual routine. Finally, Gavin's shoulders relaxed. "We're in." With a click, he gestured for Veronica to step closer. She inhaled, stepping up to the laptop. The screen displayed a gallery of images. Some were from her daily life, pictures of coffee cups, scenic views of the James River. Then came the covert shots, blurry but still decipherable images of men in dark jackets. Another series showed crates being loaded into a black SUV, license plates partially visible. Gavin's eyebrows rose. "This is pretty significant. You have timestamps, geotags. Enough for an investigation, maybe more. The metadata indicates these photos were taken right before your arrest." Veronica let out a breath she'd been holding. "Can you pull the videos?" Gavin nodded, navigating to a folder. Moments later, a video popped up. Shaky footage of a man with a scar running down his left cheek, handing over a thick envelope to another unidentified figure. Even with the phone's vantage, it was clear the envelope was stuffed with cash. The crates in the background bore markings that might indicate contraband. The audio, though muffled, captured snippets of conversation, references to a shipment and next drop. It was all the evidence Veronica needed to prove she was there on legitimate business, though the sensitive nature of her mission and the possibility of corruption within the local police force meant not everyone could be trusted with the raw footage. Whitmore exchanged a grave look with her. "We'll keep these files in a secure location. The judge only needs to see the relevant bits, enough to confirm your story. But we also need to forward some of this to Homeland Security. This is bigger than just an assault charge." The adrenaline surged in Veronica's veins. "So now we can prove I wasn't there to commit a crime. I was there to gather intel on a significant smuggling ring. Decker and Morales disrupted a federal operation." Chandler leaned in to watch the video. "This changes everything," he murmured. Sergeant Quinn cleared his throat. "Well, I'll have to report this, but you do have a court order, so it's all legal. He seemed uneasy, as though questioning whether he really wanted to wade into the ramifications of a possibly corrupt officer. Whitmore nodded. We'll ensure it's done by the book, but we appreciate your cooperation, Sergeant. Quinn gave a stiff nod, stepping out of the room to make a call. Meanwhile, Gavin began cataloging the files. Chandler pulled Veronica aside, a spark of triumph lighting his eyes. We'll present this in court. We can't reveal the entire mission, but this is enough to show you're a federal agent investigating a serious crime. Plus, it proves you had no motive to assault any officer. Veronica felt a wave of relief so powerful that it threatened to buckle her knees. Finally, she whispered. Finally, we can clear this up. But even as joy flooded her, a new worry surfaced. Decker. If he realized the phone contained incriminating evidence that might implicate him if he'd knowingly or unknowingly aided criminals, he could become desperate. The same smirk that once made her blood boil was nowhere to be seen now. She sensed the tide shifting, and in that shift, the possibility of danger grew. Still, she reminded herself, she was an officer of the United States Secret Service, trained to handle adversity and risk. Decker might try something, but she wasn't powerless. This time the system was working in her favor, and soon the entire courtroom would see the truth. The next morning, the courtroom brimmed with anticipation. Word had spread that a significant piece of evidence would be presented. Reporters thronged the hallway, cameras poised for the next bombshell in a case that had, until now, seemed like a routine assault on a police officer. Judge Lancaster took her seat and wasted no time. Counsel, I understand we have new evidence to review. Chandler stood, his manner confident but controlled. Yes, Your Honor. With the court's permission, I would like to present the findings from the forensic examination of Miss Carter's phone. Margaret Fisher looked uneasy. She likely hadn't had ample time to counter whatever the phone might reveal. The judge motioned for Chandler to proceed. Agent Whitmore, seated discreetly in the gallery, made eye contact with Veronica, giving her a subtle nod. Chandler approached a large video monitor set up for evidence display. Your Honor, the phone contains photographic and video evidence recorded shortly before Miss Carter's arrest. We have reason to believe it shows her observing a criminal transaction, which would clarify her presence in the parking garage. In the interest of time, we've excerpted a few key clips. He clicked a remote, and the monitor sprang to life. The jury leaned forward. The prosecution watched with growing trepidation. Officer Decker, sitting at the prosecution's side, stared at the screen, his face blanching. The first video clip played, shaky footage of men unloading a crate from a black SUV. One man accepted a thick envelope of cash from another. The audio was faint, but words like shipment, next drop, and keep it quiet were discernible. Chandler paused the video. Miss Carter recorded this as part of a federal investigation. She was acting under the authority of the U.S. Secret Service, investigating a suspected arms trafficking ring. The men in these images are believed to be involved in illegal weapons smuggling, and Miss Carter's mission was to document this exchange. He cleared his throat. Therefore, her actions were not only lawful but part of a critical federal operation. She did not instigate any assault on officers. Rather, she was in the process of gathering intel. An audible murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Lancaster raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. Fisher hastened to her feet, trying to salvage the prosecution's stance. Your Honor, we've not received any official documentation stating Miss Carter's affiliation with the Secret Service. That was Whitmore's cue. He stood, identifying himself formally. Your Honor, I'm Special Agent Darrell Whitmore, U.S. Secret Service. Due to the sensitive nature of Miss Carter's assignment, her identity was classified. We can, however, confirm her status and the legitimacy of her mission. We have the necessary documentation here. He handed a sealed folder to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. Judge Lancaster opened it, flipping through the pages with a measured expression. Then she looked at Veronica. Miss Carter, is it true that you were conducting this investigation at the directive of the U.S. Secret Service? Veronica stood, speaking clearly. Yes, Your Honor. Why didn't you disclose this immediately? Veronica met the judge's gaze, her voice unwavering. I was bound by operational secrecy. I attempted to inform Officers Decker and Morales that they were making a grave mistake, but they didn't listen. I also lacked clearance to share these details without authorization. My agency has since intervened to set the record straight. Fisher appeared visibly flustered. She turned to Decker, who looked ready to bolt. His once confident posture had slumped. The evidence on screen and the official documentation from Whitmore were painting an entirely different picture of the so-called violent suspect. The officer's smirk was nowhere in sight. Judge Lancaster frowned. It seems we have a significant development. Miss Carter's actions may well have been lawful, even commendable. The charges against her stand on very shaky ground. Miss Fisher, do you still wish to proceed with this prosecution? Fisher hesitated, cheeks flushing. Your Honor, we will need time to review this new evidence. But given these revelations, the Commonwealth may reconsider. The judge nodded firmly. Then we'll break for recess and reconvene this afternoon. If the Commonwealth finds that Miss Carter was acting under federal authority, I expect a swift resolution. With a final rap of the gavel, the judge ended the session. Whispers broke out among spectators. Reporters rushed to the hallway, phones at the ready to broadcast the day's dramatic turn of events. Officer Decker tried to exit quietly, but Veronica caught his eye. He paused, jaw clenched, sweat beading on his temple. There was no smirk now, only a flash of fear and anger. He muttered something under his breath before pushing his way through the crowd, ignoring reporters' questions. Veronica took a deep breath, scanning the room. The karmic balance had shifted. The truth was out, and Decker's arrogance now stood on the brink of unraveling everything he'd attempted to conceal. Soon enough, the real criminals would be in the crosshairs of a federal task force, and she would no longer stand accused but be recognized for the agent she truly was. Afternoon came, and the tension that filled the John Marshall Courts building earlier had shifted into a kind of electric buzz of anticipation. News vans lined the street outside, and inside, the corridors teemed with curious onlookers and legal professionals eager for the final development in this extraordinary case. Veronica Carter took her seat next to Isaac Chandler, who smiled reassuringly. On the other side of the aisle, Margaret Fisher conferred in hushed tones with Officer Decker, whose face was now ashen. The sense of inevitability hung in the air. Judge Lancaster arrived, promptly calling the court to order. She wasted no time in addressing the elephant in the room. I understand the Commonwealth has had an opportunity to review the evidence and consult with federal authorities. Miss Fisher, do you have an announcement? Fisher stood, clearing her throat. Yes, Your Honor. In light of the corroborating evidence provided by the U.S. Secret Service, we find that Miss Carter was acting under federal jurisdiction and posed no criminal intent. Therefore, we move to dismiss all charges immediately. A sudden flurry of voices erupted and the judge's gavel banged. Veronica felt a surge of gratitude and relief so intense it made her heart pound. Chandler patted her arm, triumphant. Motion to dismiss is granted, Judge Lancaster declared. Miss Carter, you are free to go. Court is adjourned. She rose, casting Veronica a firm yet respectful look before disappearing through a side door. The abrupt end left everyone momentarily stunned. Reporters clambered to get statements. Veronica tried to keep her composure as cameras flashed and microphones were thrust in her face. But she managed a concise response. I was simply doing my job to protect national security. I hope this clarifies things. Meanwhile, Decker looked as though he wanted to sink into the floor. Several internal affairs officers hovered nearby, indicating that the Richmond Police Department wouldn't be letting him off scot-free. Rumors swirled that the feds were now investigating possible ties between local cops and the arms trafficking ring. Veronica stepped outside, inhaling a lungful of fresh air. Agent Whitmore caught up to her, a small grin on his usually stoic face. I believe a debrief is in order, he said quietly. Isaac Chandler joined them, shaking Veronica's hand firmly. Congratulations. Justice prevailed. though it came dangerously close to a fiasco. "It's not over yet," Veronica replied, nodding at Whitmore. "We still have an operation to conclude." Whitmore led her away from the prying lenses of the media, down a side exit where a black SUV awaited. Inside, they found a quiet moment. He handed her a sealed envelope. "Your new assignment directives. We've uncovered additional intel on the trafficking network. We'll be working with local federal task forces to apprehend them." Veronica glanced at the envelope, feeling a surge of renewed purpose. "So I'm back on the job already?" "Of course," Whitmore said, arching a brow. "You've got quite the track record for infiltration." Then he added more softly, "And I'm sorry about this whole ordeal. You shouldn't have had to endure that level of scrutiny, but you handled yourself admirably." She shrugged, a wry smile curving her lips. "Occupational hazard. The important part is that we can now turn our full attention to the criminals." Whitmore nodded in agreement. "We'll be coordinating with the FBI as well, given the scope. Christopher Wray's office is aware. We may need every resource we can get." A wave of pride and resolve washed over Veronica. She'd survived a grueling trial, guarded her identity under immense pressure, and still managed to secure the damning evidence needed to go after a dangerous trafficking ring. Despite Officer Decker's smirk, her professional integrity had remained unshaken. As she settled into the SUV, she reflected on the journey, on how a simple smirk could ignite a maelstrom of false accusations, tension, and near catastrophe. But in the end, justice had been served. The truth prevailed, and the karmic retribution that Decker and his allies would face was only just beginning. Some might call it poetic justice. Others might call it fate. Veronica simply saw it as the natural order of things when deception attempts to overshadow truth. Sooner or later, the illusions crumble. And in that moment of collapse, those who once believed themselves invincible find themselves answering for their actions. In the world of undercover operations and hidden agendas, it's easy to forget that a single moment, or even a single smirk, can unravel every illusion of power. Officer Bradley Decker learned that lesson the hard way, when his smug certainty collided with the unwavering truth of Veronica Carter's secret mission. A trial intended to convict her became the stage for her exoneration and the dramatic exposure of an extensive arms trafficking ring. Now cleared of all charges, Veronica returns to her true calling, ready to dismantle criminal networks and protect national security from the shadows. If you found yourself on the edge of your seat during this story, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. By spreading these tales of intrigue and justice, you help shine a light on the hidden heroes and unstoppable truths that drive our world. Stay tuned for more gripping accounts, and thank you for your support.